I'm going to give a brief introduction, and what I want to do is motivate one important topic, and that's why OpenStack is really an important thing, that this is not technology in search of a problem to solve, but there's a much bigger issue going on. And I want to do that in two ways. The first is to tell you a little bit about one of my research methodologies. I've been in the business for a long time. I know a lot of people, and when there's a topic to learn about, I talk to people that I know that are more informed than I am. So I've been doing this for a couple of years with OpenStack, and I find people in the middle of the industry, and I ask them, can you assure me that OpenStack is going to succeed? Is it going to be a commercial success? And the honest answer from these people up until at least last summer would be to say, no, the game is still in play, it's interesting, we're just in the first inning, whatever your favorite analogy is. And then last summer, I was at the Dell analyst meeting and ran into John Swainson. And John runs software for Dell, but I met him when we were both in the development tools business, and he was running the IBM Toronto software lab. So I've known him for a long time. If you know John, he's a very straightforward, direct, easy person to deal with. And I said, John, can I ask you my favorite question? And he said, sure, Peter. I said, John, can you tell me why OpenStack is going to succeed? He said, absolutely. And I said, this is really good news. I've been asking smart people. No one has ever been confident and been willing to do that. I said, so explain to me, John. I'm all ears. And he said, OpenStack is going to succeed because there's a number of big companies like Dell that are completely screwed if it doesn't. That's right. And I think that was, number one, an entirely honest reply. What he was telling me was not that OpenStack was guaranteed to succeed. What he was telling me was Dell and IBM and HP and Cisco, the companies that are involved, aren't waiting for some sign. They're fully committed to it, and I'm going to try and motivate why they have that position. But he was just saying, don't worry about whether we're still trying to determine the future of OpenStack. We're all in because we have no choice. And that's the topic I want to spend a few minutes on. And what I want to do is use, I hope, appropriate analogy from Darwinian evolution. And I don't know whether you look at the wonderful way in which species evolved, but there was a period of time during which something called the Cambrian explosion occurred. For a short period of time, in at least this kind of evolution, a huge number of species came into play. And that was really important because it's all the species that created the diversity from which everything else evolved. And I'm going to use the following analogy with computing. We've been doing practical computing for about 70 years. The first working electronic computer was ENIAC at the University of Pennsylvania in 1945. There was one. And then if you go up to 1964, IBM introduced the System 360, the first architectural family of software compatible. And you have events like the DEC PDP-11 or DEC VAX, or the emergence of Sun and open systems, Linux, Microsoft, Windows NT, or the IBM PC. During this period, we just got a richer and richer environment to work in. Many different computers, many different operating systems, a great deal of choice, a great deal of different places where people could build software. I mean, that was the blooming area of computing. But for the last 15 years, I would argue that we're in a period of increasing infrastructure extinction, just like we worry about what's happening now with global warming and our species disappearing. And to be clear, I'm going to paint this in dramatic black and white terms. My wife makes it clear that, just be clear that you're overemphasizing, you're exaggerating. I am exaggerating, but I want to make a point by talking about it in that kind of term. For the last 15 years, diversity has been disappearing. The first disappearing step, I would say, is somewhere around the beginning of 2000, we collectively agreed that we were going to build everything on the x86 because Intel had won the volume economics of microprocessors. And for somebody that participated in the architecture wars, this is sort of sad because the x86 is a sucky. It's an old, accreted, ugly architecture. But we collectively agreed it was going to be good enough, and it's no longer, you can't argue about text editors, you can't argue about microprocessors. We know what it is now. Google around 2000 started to create massive infrastructure out of inexpensive commodity parts. they've led to a point now where we talk about data centers, where everything in the data center is more or less the same. This is disappearance of diversity, disappearance of opportunity. VMware invented ESX, practical commercial virtualization. All of a sudden, because of the hypervisor, the operating system you built in was no longer a critical issue. It used to be you had to decide if you were running on a Windows Server machine or a Linux machine or Windows NT, this version or a different version. And now it all runs happily on the same hardware on a hypervisor. So again, we're losing an opportunity for diversity. You can still build on those, but if you talk about the infrastructure, it's becoming more or less the same. And then Amazon came along in 2006 and created on-demand elastic computing, the fact that you could now get resources out of a cloud service on demand when you wanted them. And as you probably know, every startup in Silicon Valley no longer buys anything other than their laptop for developers. Everything else is just run in the cloud because you don't have to buy computing. And this is wonderful for the developer, but it's loss of diversity. In 2007, not so long ago, Apple came out with the iPhone. And all of a sudden, we really think predominantly of apps, and I'll say the iPhone, I know it's iPhone and Android, but it's not a question of all the different UIs on PCs that we used to deal with. It's now a question of building something on the iPhone. So again, we've lost a whole layer of diversity. The number of ways you build a good application has changed fairly dramatically. VMware and Cisco and EMC constructed this interesting company called VCE. VCE sells composite systems built out of components, and the reason people like them is if you want to do a virtualization platform, you just buy vBlocks from them. You don't care about what the pieces are below because you're just buying a sort of an array platform. And again, it's got great benefits, but it's a loss of diversity. And now we see, and I've just chosen the VMware Evo Rail, we're seeing converged systems where solution vendors are creating entire templated or blueprinted stacks of hardware and software, because if you want to get an application going and they just say, hey, buy this, it's all going to work. It's great, but it's a loss of diversity. So I would argue, and I mean this very seriously, in the last 15 years, we're seeing infrastructure extinction. And that by itself is significant, except if provoked, I can paint it in really draconian terms. And in fact, I was egged on by members of 451, and in December, I published a paper speculating that Amazon Web Services takes over the world. If it's like Windows, and Windows got 75% of all the server business, why wouldn't that happen? Why at some point in the future won't 75% of all IT run on one cloud platform? So it's not a probability, probably, but it's a possibility that everything is converging up. And on the one hand, it's apocalyptic. If you talk to people in IT infrastructure, people who have dedicated their careers to building all of this and thriving in the diversity, it's sort of sad. It all disappears. From the point of view of users, it's pretty exciting. You can get all the IT you want for the obligation of knowing how to get on the internet. So again, these extinction events are many architectures to one, many OSs to one, whether it's containers or hypervisors, many UIs to one, the smartphone interface rather than all the different ways we used to get to programs, and many servers to the cloud. In these big cloud things, whether it's Google or Amazon or Facebook, it's their choice of diversity. It's not a question of many people buying individual servers and building apps. So the ultimate IT apocalypse, which you ought to hold in your mind, because that's why, now the point, that's why people are so concerned about OpenStack, would be everything collapsing onto Amazon Web Services and the iPhone. And all right, that's too much. It's going to be Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure and Google applications, and it'll be the iPhone plus the Android. But if we're anywhere near that, all of this diversity that we've thrived on for the last 70 years is gone. And OpenStack is, I will claim, and I hope the panel substantiates to some degree, is the reason why people like Dell or HP or IBM are so interested in OpenStack, because it's a way of creating an alternate platform that doesn't cause everything to collapse into Amazon and VMware and Apple. So I'm going to go briefly with a little bit of what 451 has done, only to encourage you to talk to us. And if you're interested in OpenStack, we can give you lots of contextual background. We track the OpenStack community. We track OpenStack venture investment. We track OpenStack use to the degree we can, the economy of it. The OpenStack community membership has grown enormously over the last years, and interestingly is transforming from sort of technology companies or financial services into a much broader set of enterprise services. So the interest in OpenStack is broad, and you can either use that as motivation why OpenStack is bound to succeed, or an example of how many people are afraid of the extinction alternative. We have built a model. We're trying to build an economic model of OpenStack and OpenStack revenues. It's a little confusing at the moment because the preponderance of OpenStack revenues are still in the service consulting way. I mean, so we're going to describe something, and a big chunk of these numbers at the moment is not product revenues, but that's what you'd expect at this point. So we have a model we track, which is both expenditures as they are now and as we forecast them to be, and we divide them into these different categories. Again, it's a detailed model. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it in detail. We have a well-respected finance group. Tim Miller, are you still here? It runs that. We have a very good reputation within the investment community for tracking private transactions. So part of what we're doing is tracking the investment and merger transactions in OpenStack and related areas. Again, it's a service that we can provide. So the panel format, that's the end of the motivation. The panel format is VLab typical, so we're going to do it in the way it's done in VLab. And the style is to focus on a presenting company, so there is one company, the chosen one among the many. In this case, it's SwiftStack, and they will get a chance to talk about what they're doing as an entrepreneurial venture. There are all the companies in here. This is a remarkable collection of people who are involved in OpenStack, so you couldn't get a better group of people to comment on what's going on than the panel we have. Everyone else will be introduced much more briefly. I'm going to drive questions for as long as that's necessary. It's sort of fun, but the meeting will get better if you people start to drive the questions. We will show you a phone number which you can tweet to. So that's the beginning. Thank you very much for coming, and with that, Joe Arnold.
Thank you, Peter. And I can't wait to get to the panel discussion. That was very interesting. I would argue that the convergence is happening, but this is like the best time to get involved with starting a business in infrastructure, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. And thank you to VLab for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and appreciate all the research that 451 has been doing through the years. We've been subscribing with them forever. So my name is Joe Arnold, and I am the co-founder of SwiftStack. And what we do is we provide an object storage software product based on OpenStack Swift. And what that is, it's something, Amazon popularized an object storage system called S3. When OpenStack was launched, part of that project was a component designed to compete with S3, and it came from Rackspace. And what we've done is we've taken that open source project, and we're now the leaders in that project, and we've built a product, and then we've built a business around that. There's lots of interesting tech inside of that open source project and in our product, but today I thought I'd talk about what it's like to build a business in that context. So first off, how did I get here? How did the business get started? I'm an engineer, and I started doing development on mobile applications like way before the iPhone. I got involved with a web photo sharing service, and we literally scanned 35 millimeter rolls of film. It was crazy stuff. But I started getting more interested in the technology stack I was building on, and I just started getting lower and lower in the technology stack. So I first got involved with network monitoring, and that was acquired by a big networking company. And then I got involved with building a platform as a service. So I was at a company called EngineYard, and we built Ruby, and we built Ruby on Rails. So those are both open source web application development frameworks. And we're figuring, okay, well, how do we make money in open source? And so what we did was we built a deployment platform as a service to manage Ruby on Rails applications. Okay, so one day, Amazon came up and, hey, we're doing this thing called EC2. Are you interested? And we're like, okay, well, sure, let's find out what this thing is about. Flew up to Seattle. We got an investment from Amazon, and we built a platform as a service on top of that. And so it was a moment in time when a change happened in how applications were being built and being deployed in infrastructure. And it was neat to have a front row seat. Okay, but then I needed to get even further down the stack. Okay, what's this infrastructure all about? And around that same time, Chris, thank you, was part of this movement to launch OpenStack, and got the opportunity to work with other folks like Alex and do some of the early deployments of OpenStack. But here we were sitting on this data floor with a data center floor with the fans buzzing, with a lot of people involved with these projects, and thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so that's where I got into OpenStack, realized I wanted to get involved with it, build a product around it, and I knew I couldn't take on all of OpenStack. So I had to focus, right? So if we're going down the path of building a product company, trying to take on everything would have been impossible. So we narrowed down the focus and just worked on OpenStack Swift and building out that object storage system. The other decision we had to decide was which ecosystem to live in. For the guys in the row, this is Amazon eats its children, enterprise adopts children. And I had come from a world where we're building out deployment tools, getting people on Amazon, building out infrastructure, micro infrastructure might be called. And then Amazon was all, oh, we're going to do that. We see another company that build out a messaging service. Oh, no, we're going to do that too. We're going to do transcoding, mail, and the list goes on and on and on. And every single time, Amazon would start eating up and consuming these startups that were emerging in those space. So we did not want to play in that game. But what we did find out was that the enterprises were trying to build their own stacks. And we could be a player as they started to fill out one of those. So we founded SwiftStack. We found computer scientists. We're working on distributed systems. There's a lot of math involved. Started building out the sales team. And really early on, we had 4 founders. And we had our first funding was $1.5 million, and that got us started. And that got us to the point where we could land our first customers. We went for an A, and now we closed our B last quarter based on the revenue and the customers coming in. And so that was another process, and I'd be happy to share and talk about that with anyone else who'd be interested in how that process went. So what we built was a product which is subscription licensed software. So that gives us revenue for people to consume something. It allowed us to build a product which allowed us to amateurize all of that work that we've done to deploy, manage, and operate this product. It also enables enterprises to consume open source. A lot of them want to go and consume open source, but not that they don't have the skills to do it, they have other stuff to go do, and they want to bring in a company to help them get this up and running. So a product approach allowed us to build a better solution, but still get the benefits of open source. They could get the flexibility and the control that they needed. And they weren't going to public clouds because they wanted control. Currently, cost is a big issue with using public clouds. And security is still something that is in people's minds. And we're not at the lowest common denominator yet with public clouds yet. And people do have very specific application requirements, particularly at operating at scale. So that's what we're able to address. So briefly, the open source project which we work on is called OpenStack Swift. It is an object storage system. There are many companies that participate in that project. We've built a kind of brief visualization around, we've built a product, so a storage stack, and then we've built a monitoring and management framework around OpenStack Swift. And the path that we went down was to build that, what we call a controller, as both a software service as well as a fully on-premise solution. And by going down that path, we could easily onboard customers, get them in the product, get them experienced with it, see how they're using it, and then as they got up to speed, then we could bring that system fully in-house. So it gives us that hybrid operating model of SaaS and on-premise infrastructure. So just something to consider. Few customers like Ancestry.com does all those images and ancestral records. Time Warner Cable doing OpenStack, as well as DVR and video on demand. HP uses us for their private storage cloud, and eBay has just a ton of images, advertisements, things like that they're storing. So that's briefly it. 3 things. I'd encourage you to learn more about OpenStack Swift. We wrote a book published by O'Reilly. I'd encourage you to check that out. And if you want to check us out, please come to our website. Or if you know of anyone who's very interested in getting involved in the space, come seek us out because we're always hiring. Thank you.
So I think Joe did a great job of introducing what a complex topic this is. There's many things that we can talk about that are involved in the questions of OpenStack. I'm going to violate the VLab rules slightly because our next speaker, Chris Kemp, actually was at the birth event of OpenStack, was a researcher at NASA, and it was a combination of NASA and Rackspace that led to the construction of OpenStack. And I thought it would be useful for him to tell the origin story, just to give you a simple narrative of how OpenStack began.
Thanks, Peter. A lot of what Joe talked about, we were really facing in a big way at NASA. When you looked at what we were paying for storage and compute, and then you looked at some of the projects that we had to plan for, we were paying hundreds of dollars a gigabyte. And a lot of that cost wasn't just in the solutions that were available from the vendors that are potentially facing extinction events as a result of Amazon and this new hyperscale infrastructure, but the people that it took to run them internally. We had about $2 billion of our budget being spent every year on IT at NASA, and the budget was only about $18 billion. So it's a pretty big chunk of the budget, and there were some projects like the LSST project, which is a huge space telescope. It's being run here out of Stanford by a gentleman named, there's a whole big team, international team, but Jacek Bekele, who also runs a big event called the XLDB, which is hosted here. And these are projects that will generate many petabytes of data. And if you looked at what we were spending for a gigabyte, we could easily consume NASA's entire budget with a fraction of this, and then the entire federal budget, with what we were paying our contractors and for our equipment. So something had to change. And so what we really tried to do with the project was just determine how we could get the people out of the equation, automate the provisioning of infrastructure. We were looking at what Google and Amazon were doing at the time with EC2. This is 2007, 2008. There were data centers that had lots of inexpensive, homogeneous systems that were maintained by automation and software tools, not people. They were typically in shipping containers and warehouses. In some cases, they were built next to hydroelectric power plants. As it turned out, we had the perfect opportunity. I ran Mae West, which was one of the first nodes on the internet. We had a tremendous amount of inexpensive connectivity, so that's a huge asset. At Ames Research Center up the street, we had wind tunnels that consumed tremendous amounts of power. And as it turned out, we had 2 giant substations that could power these wind tunnels. We weren't using wind tunnels anymore. We were using supercomputers to do a lot of the modeling and the simulation today. So we had excess power. We had an agreement to buy it for about, I think it was 8 or 9 cents a kilowatt hour, which was about a third of what Google paid across the street. So we had inexpensive power, lots of unused land, which we've now leased to Google, but you know, it's a whole other story. You know, and lots of connectivity. And so, you know, with these 3 elements, basically provided the perfect opportunity for us to make a case for building infrastructure. So the question was, how would we do it? And we looked at a lot of the open source technologies that were out there. We didn't want to pay for a lot of commercial software because at the scale we wanted to build a system, that would, again, put us out of business because we'd have to buy it through a government subcontract kind of thing. So we looked at Eucalyptus. And at the time, this was a university project. It had some good bones to it. This was before Martin Mikos came on board, so it was really early days there with some of the original founders. And you know, we stood the first system up using Eucalyptus. And there were some things we liked about it. There were things that we didn't like about it. And the team that I brought together, who've all now started companies and are running other big things, decided that they wanted to take a swing at redoing Eucalyptus in a sense, using a more prototyping-oriented language so we could get other people involved. Eucalyptus was a monolithic Java application, so we wanted to use Python to design the system so we could get more people involved. And we fairly rapidly open-sourced the project, way before it did anything useful, frankly. And a lot of people started to get involved in Rackspace, called us a few weeks into the project, and they had the name OpenStack, and they wanted to get more people involved, and they wanted to take potentially their computing and also their storage, their Swift project, and open source all this stuff. And the question was, hey, do you guys want to go in this together? And it made a lot of sense to me because we couldn't support commercially all the infrastructure around running an open source project from NASA. That was beyond our mandate. But we, of course, would appreciate it if we had a huge interest from companies contributing code, because that's code we wouldn't have to write. And so it would essentially guarantee the success of the project. I knew I would be fired or resign or die somehow at NASA, so I needed to find a way to make this project outlive me. So this was a great way to do that. So we ended up launching OpenStack in 2010 on stage at OSCON. And the one line that I think really was NASA's contribution was, if you contribute code to this, you can help NASA explore the solar system. And NASA is now using OpenStack through a Nebula system down at JPL on their Europa Jupiter mission, which is super exciting for me because it's come full circle. They were able to buy it, they selected us, and they had the option of going with various vendors selling competitive products, which is exactly what you want, right, through the government. So that's the kind of the executive summary of how OpenStack came to be. We really just were successful, I think, because we captured the imagination of all the companies that saw Amazon and saw Google, and they saw this hyperscale threat. If you're running your applications in Amazon, trust me, that's not good for anybody in the computer industry. They are a fantastically efficient organization. They think like a retail organization. They're like Walmart. They are always driving prices down. They're very hard on their suppliers. And if you're supplying anything to them, you're not going to get good margins on any of that infrastructure. So the question is, what does that mean to the other $3 trillion of IT? And I think OpenStack provides a viable platform where everyone can come together and build a platform that can power the future of software in the enterprise.
And do you want to briefly say what the company does?
Yeah, so Nebula, I brought in folks like Andy Bechtolsheim and original Sun and Google folks, and the idea was we put this on hardware, we can make it easier for enterprises to deploy. OpenStack has been a very successful project, so it has about 24 open source projects that have to be stitched together. It's a great consulting business because enterprises come in and they want to tailor it to their requirements. We take the technology in OpenStack and we put it on a little piece of hardware that we call a cloud controller. You can plug that into off-the-shelf servers from HP, IBM, Cisco, Supermicro, Dell, and you literally just plug it in, turn it on, and it boots up as an OpenStack cloud. And we were a bit crazy and tried to do everything, and have some bruises as a result of that. But I mean, it's a great product. It does work, and we have companies ranging from movie studios like DreamWorks and Sony and Amgen and Genentech and all the national labs. Stanford actually uses one at the SLAC Linear Accelerator. Los Alamos and Sandia. We're very distributed throughout lots of large enterprises, and it's the same product everywhere. And I think the challenge for OpenStack will now be, can you get the software that runs on OpenStack Cloud A to run on OpenStack Cloud B, and can a platform truly emerge here? And a lot of good work is happening now at the foundation, where I'm on the board, to try to standardize what the core capabilities of OpenStack are, so we do see the interoperability and the portability of software between these different public and private cloud environments.
Let's save some of that for later, because that's a really good topic. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Mirantis, I know, has an equally interesting origin story, because at least the founder came out of Romania and was there with the fall of the dictatorship. So there's great stories, but they probably aren't suitable for presenting here. Mirantis is a company that started in sort of intelligent back-end consulting and has migrated into being a major force in OpenStack. Alex is one of the founders, and I hope he can again just sort of briefly position how they fit into this environment and what you should think about Mirantis, at least to set the context of the discussion.
So I'll probably give a 45-second history brief as to how we ended up in OpenStack. We looked at it very, very differently. We were a consulting company doing work in various infrastructure projects around cloud, and we actually ran into OpenStack and PayPal, and we've done a successful project there. And then we understood that cloud computing is not really a technology shift, but it's a whole different shift in economics of computing, not dissimilar to what happened when Microsoft and IBM PC came out and created the whole client server revolution, which lowered the barrier to entry for computing by an order of magnitude at least, which created an industry which is orders of magnitude larger compared to the old days of IBM and Data General and the like. And so when we understood that that was the case, we said the next thing that's going to happen is there needs to be an operating system that will drive all that. And considering that you have Amazon and Microsoft was coming up and all that, you need to be able to level the playing field on the economics, and that means that the operating system cannot be actually owned by one particular vendor. It has to be open. This way, the price will be able to be driven down, and the economics of the cloud alternative to those public clouds will be similar, and therefore this will be a viable alternative to that. Then we looked at all the operating systems of the time, and we saw Eucalyptus at the time was actually leading technology, and then we saw Nimbula, and then we saw CloudStack that was actually pretty advanced as well, and then we saw OpenStack. And the only thing we saw that OpenStack was not mature technologically, but it had a rapidly developing ecosystem. And so we said, and we went all into OpenStack. And then we called a few folks. One of them was Randy Bias, and that caused the first project to happen at Internet, and we were working side by side with Joe. And a year and a half later, out of 50 use cases that OpenStack had, more than 60% had Mirantis trademark on that. Then we realized that we had the use cases. We used the money from the services engagement to start funding our product development, raise some money to move faster, and today, we took a baton from Chris, who started this. We are one of the top 3 developers and authors of OpenStack. I think we wrote more than 15% of OpenStack as it stands today. We have a large services business. We have what's called a pure play distribution that is popular with hundreds of customers. We have a #1 training business, and so we are probably one of the larger OpenStack players today in the industry.
Great example of that there is life after a communist dictatorship, and other than organized crime. I like the Mirantis outcome. Our next speaker is from VMware, and as he says, he has a wonderful name, evocative name. Unfortunately, when people see a picture of him and realize he's not an attractive Italian woman, he has to go through an interesting resetting. VMware is really interesting in this discussion because on the one hand, it's one of the enemies, one of the reasons why OpenStack exists, and yet VMware has done a wonderful job of either co-opting the enemy or constructively working with it. Maybe you can give just a brief introduction. I'm sure we'll get into the details later.
So I will be very provocative in the sense that an Italian will be very short and brief, at least for now. I know you won't believe me. Oh, yeah, of course. Actually, we pretend we have a language in Italian, and we use the hands only, but then people will freak out if they don't hear us. So we pretend we have a language to talk together. So anyway, thanks for having me here, first of all. Thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure. So my name is Simone, so you can try to pronounce it correctly. And I work at VMware, and previously I was at Amazon Web Services. So I've seen the cloud computing industry somehow start from pretty much nothing to what it is today. I think that it is very clear that, as always, technology innovates. And OpenStack is, I would say, one of the most interesting initiatives or projects or platforms, as you want to call it, that is getting a lot of momentum. And of course, any company, including VMware, has to realize that when customers need certain technologies or access to certain technologies, sometimes you have to realize that you have to give them that option. So in particular, and I want to be very brief here, VMware decided to embrace OpenStack by creating its own distribution of OpenStack. It's called VIO, VMware Integrated OpenStack, and essentially very quickly allows you to run OpenStack on top of a VMware environment. So using the vSphere, NSX, the usual things that VMware normally sells to customers.
So just for the sake of the audience, can you describe what it means to run OpenStack on top of VMware? I mean,
yes.
it makes sense, but it's not obvious to the...
Yes. So certain products that VMware sells, such as vSphere or NSX, vSphere provides virtualization, NSX provides network virtualization. They offer certain features that customers sometimes want. And if you want to take advantage of those features while running OpenStack, so you can use, for example, the VMware Integrated OpenStack or other OpenStack distributions, and at the same time, use those features underlying OpenStack. So for example, high availability, you can use it on vSphere, just to bring one example. You can also use high availability even if you run an OpenStack on top of it. So customers can take advantage of both worlds, in a sense. I'm trying to simplify for the sake of...
Wonderful for the beginning. Our final panelist and part of the VLab tradition is somebody from the investment community, in this case, Jacques from US Venture Partners. Can you, I think people probably know what US Venture Partners do, but position yourself in how you think about the OpenStack ecology and investment?
Sure. So I really like your evolution slide because we are part of that evolution. I myself come from the semiconductor industry and understand the hardware side of this business, and was, like many of you, in love with competing architecture and RISC and CISC and all those wonderful things that we argued about. By the way, x86 is a horrible architecture. At this point, the underlying machine is no longer an x86, it's just an intermediate language. The machine's actually pretty good. Digression, sorry. USVP has been around since 1981, is now in its 11th fund, and has made tremendous investment on the hardware side and in the very vendors that you believe, and I would tend to agree with you, may disappear as we go through that. We were investors in Xilinx and Stratacom that became essential parts of Cisco. We were investors in Force10 that became Dell Networks. We were investors in SanDisk, in Mellanox, in Dune. You know, you take Mellanox and Dune together, just about every packet of the internet goes through that silicon. So we really love that space, and the question is, well, why don't we invest in it anymore? And largely, the reason is there's no buyer. The Amazon, you know, is for us, just like for the rest of people, is the big boogaboo. Amazon doesn't buy anything from our companies. And by the way, if they wanted to buy something from our companies, it would be at a price that we would refuse to sell to them. They, by the way, don't buy our companies either for a large part. Everything is internally developed. Everything has to be done that way. And they've mastered an element which I think is very important for the crowd to understand, that they transformed the economy of scale leverage that enables them to amortize tremendous amount of engineering talent over a quantum of computing, which they can then sell at a ridiculous price. And if you don't have the multiplier effect that they have, then you can't afford the engineering talent, and therefore you can't afford to have free everything that gets you that quantum unit of computing at a ridiculous price. And so when we look at the space, we go, oh my, what are we to do? We're supposed to go where the puck goes, and so where is it going next? And we believe that, just like you said at the beginning, OpenStack must happen. And by the way, if OpenStack doesn't happen, I don't know if the number is $1 trillion, but some number like that will disappear from the economy. It has a tremendous deflation effect on the economy. Now, the question is, does OpenStack counter that or enables it? Because in a way, OpenStack is a way for everybody else to buy an Amazon-like infrastructure and therefore apply the exact same methodology, which forces of market will make sure happens. And so, you know, I hear that Dell and IBM and others embrace OpenStack. I hope that they have a plan that's not hardware-based, because OpenStack will commoditize their own hardware. So when we think about it in terms of investment opportunity, then we think about where do we invest in OpenStack, and full disclosure, I'm on the board of PlumGrid, where we investors, which is a software-defined network on top of OpenStack. I'm also on the board of Zerto, which is a disaster recovery software that runs on VMware, OpenStack, and Amazon. And so those are good vantage points to see where you can invest. It's hard to make money in open source. You know, everybody always uses Red Hat. Well, it's a long story by now, right? And there haven't been a whole string of Red Hat successors upon which we can say that's the next Red Hat, and therefore we will invest. So we have to invest around. We have to invest in, you know, we didn't invest in you, but that would be an example of a theory that says, here is an open source software, but enterprise level SLA is going to force better quality. And because most of the customers do not have the engineering talent of Amazon, they need to resort to Mirantis and others to cobble something together. And at the end, they're going to have to pay for something to make that happen. But that's a very careful and very thoughtful way to step into what looks like a minefield as this industry is going through that tremendous deflation.
Please.
And how we do that is very hard. And, you know, obviously that shifts the attention to things that run on top of and where a lot more of the added value gets captured.
So there's I just want to focus a little bit on one really interesting point that Jacques meant, which is the issue of expertise. That one of the things that really makes the Googles and the Amazons and Microsoft so powerful is they literally hire the best engineers in the world, and they treat system design. They have the best engineers. They know what the problems are because they're serving the current load, and so they can uniquely move technology forward in the way that was described. You know, they don't need anyone else's expertise, but that's because they have the expertise. So that's one thing that just, in contrast, if you look at traditional enterprise IT, it's expertise devoid. Because the people, I don't mean to insult people that work in enterprise IT, but they're different from the kind of people that Google hires. So it's just one of the issues that's underneath this is this issue of expertise. The topic was brought up is Walmart. And it's an interesting question that Walmart squeezes value out of the system, but Walmart did that because it served the buying public. It got people high quality products cheaply. So we look around and we don't like what Walmart did, but they just did what we wanted, is the same true of IT. Yes, all this value gets collapsed out, but that's because it makes it cheaper for the end user. Did anyone want to comment on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Jacques' right, but I would argue that that deflation is happening anyway.
I agree.
Right, and I think as enterprises start to adopt these solutions, that they're going to be able to crush that value out of the system. And I think to your point, Peter, earlier about this kind of everything distills down, and but that's later. Like, we still got a while to go. I mean, there's no better time than now to go out and start a business around infrastructure, because the change is so dramatic, right? You have the iPhone or the Android, you have Amazon that's happening, you have a bunch of developers that are swooping in, changing how they're building applications. You have enterprises now who are the CFO is calling up the IT guys and saying, well, we have to go do something about this. This is not going to be a status quo for a while. You've got to do more, and you've got to do it for less money, because otherwise we're going to go over here. Right. Now, that's an awesome situation to be in if you're building some technology. Open source is great because you can it's a great way to be involved with a bigger ecosystem, but it's a great point of attack, if you will, for a software company to gather the expertise required in order to solve that problem and just go attack it.
But I understand the argument, and then you have companies like VMware or Amazon or the like, which build from the strength of putting together stuff. I mean, how do you think about innovation? Is that something that's not natural?
I'll take that. I mean, how many of you shop at Walmart and buy your groceries at Walmart? Show of hands. Okay.
It's not a representative crowd.
Yeah, and that's
exactly. So true. I was going to say that.
And that's my point, right? So the NSA does not use Amazon. They use OpenStack. There are organizations where value is in differentiation, right? Where margins are in differentiation. Walmart's a low-margin business that provides a fairly small subset of products in very large volumes. And that's what Amazon's doing for IT. And I think to the extent that your business requires something faster, something more secure, something more local, something more, that's where OpenStack can play. And that's where the margins are. And that's where OpenStack plugs in.
So just to be fair, my wife's parents lived in El Dorado, Arkansas, which is the place in the world where oil was discovered second. So it turns out in El Dorado, Arkansas, if you go, everyone shops at Walmart. So Walmart's very good. It identifies the population it serves, and Walmart doesn't think it can get a big chunk in Palo Alto, but that sort of makes sense. But before you criticize Walmart, go to other parts of the country and see what a breadth of the population it suffers.
No.
So just a general comment. I mean, I kind of said this, and I'll comment on the same thing. If prices go down, usually what happens is consumption goes way up disproportionately, right? So there's nothing wrong with the price of computing being less. That's what allows for hyperscale. That's what allows for Hadoop and similar systems to become viable, which will consume orders and orders and orders of magnitude more computing. So that is something that creates the opportunity for all of us to create new businesses, because the new classes of businesses are becoming possible, right? It's the old conversation about Luddites who tried to, kill machines because they, replaced people. Well, it's the same thing. Something gets replaced, but if your economics works, you create a much larger and much more diverse ecosystem of things that wasn't possible before.
You wanting to jump in?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you want to make Amazon people angry, tell them they're like Walmart. Like you said, they would just go nuts. When you were saying that earlier, I thought,
it's a compliment. Like they're the Walmart of the cloud.
They would not like that.
No, they're lowering prices.
So anyway,
they're the Android of the cloud.
A couple quick comments. I think the Walmart/OpenStack comparison is very interesting for one reason. I think that the whole point here is that Amazon, as you mentioned before, by going at large scale, it can actually spread the cost of the individual security engineer or high availability engineer across a million of customers. And that, of course, gives them a tremendous advantage. Even though I wouldn't agree that the best engineers necessarily go to work for either Amazon or Google or even VMware, because some of the most talented engineers, they decide that this IT environment is not good enough, I have a better idea, and I go start a new company. And we have, I think, good examples here that did that, right? So some of the talent is actually looking at how can I do this better, and has this passion and drive to just innovate things. While sometimes people say, I want to just work on a challenging thing, even if I have to do it for a large company. So it depends on personal choices, etc. But the point is, though, scale really matters. So I think in terms of OpenStack, what's interesting is to see if OpenStack can reach the scale at which the open source environment can actually either compete or at least be compared with the investment that Amazon and Google or other companies are doing to provide something that at some level is very similar.
So could we talk about that for a moment? Because I think that's one of the questions, because on the one hand, OpenStack encourages diversity. You can get the open source, you can make it different, but making it different then defeats the economy of consolidation. What's the right way?
I want to comment on this because I think there is, before we get even to scale, there is actually a resource equation question, because what's happening in open source is, yes, Amazon is building a whole stack and they have thousands of engineers, but look at open source. We have multiple thousands of engineers building OpenStack, micro-funded by a whole bunch of companies, and that's just a platform. And then underneath, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of companies providing components and, again, funding that. So when you look at the amount of resource and engineering that is existing in this ecosystem, even without scale, it's comparable or even more than what Amazon and Google have to put to bear. Now, the challenge is it as efficient and how well it's organized? But the large ecosystem is solving that question by micropayments from all those companies and community. That's the only way to compete.
I partially disagree, if I may, very quickly, for one aspect. So I would compare, I would say, the market penetration or the market impact. And in that case, it is very clear that Amazon is by far the winner, right? At the same time, though, we should also look at trends. And I'm actually seeing a lot of uptake on OpenStack recently, more than in the previous years. Previous years, there were a lot of contenders to be what OpenStack is today. Now it is quite clear that OpenStack is the protagonist of that type of initiative, right? So in that sense, I think currently, in this case, if you talk about just public cloud, which is only a small fraction of IT spending, by the way, Amazon is clearly the leader, and this is undisputed. But IT spending is much bigger. So that's where OpenStack or even other companies can still have a play. In fact, for example, VMware pretty much owns the private space, or 80% of workloads, virtualized workloads run on VMware. So in that case, even if it doesn't mean 80% of the IT revenues, but it means that there are different players in different parts of the IT spending overall. So I think we should look not only at the penetration that there is in the public cloud today, but in the case of OpenStack, look at how you can be faster in getting into the remaining 90% of IT spending, which is still in the enterprise in private environments. That's where the game is going to be played.
So Jacques, could you comment on this from the point of, because you play the game of trying to understand where consolidation will occur and where value is. How do you see this fragmentation or commonality issue in terms of the investment?
I think the key element is to recognize that if Amazon is at 1x unit of cost and inside enterprise data center old-fashioned are probably at 100x of cost, I think it's 2 orders of magnitude, it's not 20%, right? There is a need for SLA of the type that enterprises want, for which people will be willing to pay 3, 4, 5, 10x unit of cost. Not 1x, they'll be willing to pay more for the certainty of having somebody that will answer, somebody that will guarantee that it will actually give them what they think, security and all those elements. And we see tremendous opportunity in that space. And it's interesting when you compare Europe and the United States. In Europe, the traditional telcos and a bunch of other firms have been, for many, many years, the IT partners. And so if you are BMW or Porsche or somebody like that, and you're looking around, you're like, okay, I hear about this Amazon thing, but no way I'm doing that. Who do you turn to? Well, Deutsche Telekom or one of the other partners. And those people, I believe, will tremendously benefit from the rise of OpenStack, will tremendously contribute to it, and will present a real alternative to Amazon. And I think that's very important for the industry. I stand by my previous statement that the deflation and the lack of differentiation at the hardware level, that train is gone. And there's no place to go there because their workloads looking downwards all will look the same. And there's not enough differentiation to build a serious company. Higher up, lots to do. And the ability, as was mentioned before, to have that lower cost, to have that availability, to have that flexibility more than anything in what used to be traditional IT will unleash enormous opportunities that will, I agree with the PC analogy and the client server that you made, probably will make the $3 trillion go to 500 million, and the rest will become $10 trillion of things that will be built on top of that. And so that's the way we try and think about it.
Well, GE said, right, that the IoT alone will double, in the next, 5 years, will double the GDP of the United States.
So
Just the economy that they're going to have, 20 trillion.
the question is Amazon a $10 trillion company, or is OpenStack a $10 trillion opportunity? Or is it some mix?
It's neither.
Are we going one way or the other?
I mean, we're seeing now people they're going to the public cloud, but we're seeing even now retreat from that because Amazon is doing something that offers some certain product, but they don't. So imagine this: some features on a an X by Y by Z axis, but for whatever reason they don't need this type of capability. They want to do something either higher performance or lower cost, and they have some unique differentiator they're trying to bring onto their own data center. So we're still living in the world where I think enterprises still have some specialization that they're trying to take on, and certainly that's happening with the web scale guys. So we're seeing some of that, and then on with the enterprise guys, there's still lots of features and functionality that the behaviors that they would expect from an enterprise vendor that needs to be, that still can offer even a lower price than going to a public cloud.
So there clearly are a category of people that absolutely want OpenStack, and there could be financial services or people that operate on web scale, and people that in fact find differentiating value in IT. But I mean, what was it, the famous claim of a decade ago that IT was no longer business value? I don't think that's true, but isn't it true that for the vast majority of the money that's spent on IT, there is no technical differentiation? The differentiation comes in how you think of your business, but not in the platform you run on? Isn't the market
I
for
disagree.
No.
Totally wrong.
Yeah, I totally. So look, people are able to do way more now because of that kind of crushing of the cost of the infrastructure.
The more pressure, the more pressure you have from the market to be competitive, the more every single bit you can get from IT, from marketing, from whatever counts. So we might agree that part of IT is commoditized, but at the same time, if you want to get an edge, most of the time that edge is found on IT just because IT is more agile than physical stuff, for example.
Yeah, look at like.
Yeah, but it may be at the application layer, maybe at the
Yeah, of
business
course.
logic
Yeah,
layer.
of course.
What we're
It
talking
will
about,
not be at having a better arrangement of
Oh, no.
EMC disks.
No, definitely not.
But it's
Definitely
not about that. I mean, I just piggyback on what you said. How many of us are using PG&E?
Yeah.
See, full show of hands, right? So, if the world of computing were just the oligopoly of three clouds, eventually, the service, the differentiation, the price is going to be as good as the service we're getting from PG&E, and the choice is going to be as much. So if you think about a company that's in the data space, and data is becoming the driver of where we're going, and differentiation of how you process data is the core differentiation of businesses of the future. If the only choice you have on the commodity is PG&E, how can you really differentiate? So what that means is that public clouds, they create adoption patterns that everybody learns. But for this world to be balanced, you need to have as much an alternative, size-wise and dollar-wise and all that, to the public cloud oligopoly as the public cloud oligopoly itself. That means that every time we see Google and Amazon and Microsoft getting larger, this creates a much larger offset, and that's the market that we're playing in.
Yeah, but I think your analogy
people
isn't
don't-
right.
Yeah, no,
Your
people-
analogy isn't right
No,
because
no.
if you want a 2,000 kilowatt fridge or a 1,000 kilowatt fridge, sorry, watts, not kilowatt, fridge.
That would be a huge fridge.
You-
A lot of beers.
True Palo Alto
you are going to GE and Whirlpool or whatever and competing at that level. You're not going to PG&E and say, please give me 55 volt for the next 24 hours.
No, but if you're building a data-intensive application,
Yeah, but people don't make decisions based on
Let me
like,
pop this back up to,
Well-
the discussion is really good, but in this context, what is OpenStack? What is it doing? Is it helping commoditize things? Is it helping differentiate things?
in my view, just to continue with my argument, it's the platform that will allow people own their infrastructure at a commensurate cost to that of a public cloud.
well, people don't make decisions based on like morals when they're going through this decision-making process, right? They're not like going, oh, I shouldn't buy from Amazon because someday down in the future, they're going to be this big monster, right? People are making really specific decisions about their applications, what's going to be best for me tomorrow, the next day.
Small companies, not big ones.
Well, let me,
Correct.
so
Well,
let me,
okay, sure. Well, but those are, yeah,
can I
thank you,
reframe
Chris.
a little bit?
Please,
So,
go for it.
What's interesting to me is there are very few companies that have started in the last 5 years that have bought anything from the vendors which are part of the apocalypse, right? Most startups don't buy anything from HP, IBM, Cisco, VMware, Oracle, any of these companies. They do everything on Amazon out of necessity, right? Out of opportunity, because they can build their applications from scratch on Amazon and take advantage of the elasticity of the environment, of the economics, of being able to use the resources when necessary. Enterprises have trillions of dollars invested in people, processes, applications, hardware, infrastructure. And when you bring a cloud into an enterprise, it's not the center of the universe. It's not everything. It's a little thing that needs to integrate into all of those things, which is complicated, right? So when we first shipped our product a year and a half ago, people didn't know what to do with it. It's like an Apple II that doesn't have any software on it. You know, it runs basic, right? Seriously.
I swear to God, the biggest favorite feature has been our integration with an Microsoft
Yes.
Active Directory environment. People are like, wow, that's awesome.
And they can then
I don't
log-
need to provision user accounts on my cloud anymore. It's on.
People
Like,
can now log into
wow,
a computer
right.
that doesn't have any software,
Yeah.
right, in the enterprise.
Which
So-
is the start.
It's weird, but it's true. You know, it's
Well, but to this effect, those of us who kind of know OpenStack a little bit, heard the word Murano, which is now finally becoming part of OpenStack proper, and our customers love it because it's a way to just have an app catalog and everything they're used to running is finally available. So yes, it's about creating the ecosystem.
So you get a feeling why this is such an interesting topic. Corporate IT obviously doesn't want things to migrate to a cloud. Startups put everything on the cloud. The great thing is in 10 years, what happened right in this environment will be taught in what, Business School 101? This was obvious, this is what happened in the cloud. Today it's a great mystery, and I just want to emphasize that this discussion shows how much entrepreneurial opportunity. The world is unquestionably in change. No one's arguing with that. Change is a great time to get involved and do things in a different way. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you can't possibly be working in the OpenStack environment because it's the center of a vortex. But make sure you make money in a relatively short term. Don't bet on the way the world is going to be in 10 years if you want my free advice.
What if it's your paid advice? Will it be the same?
What?
What if it's your paid advice? Will it be the same?
I'm one of the older analysts at 451, and I delight in the fact that I am the provocateur. I go to my younger colleagues and tell them that they need to get more risk involved and think more boldly into the future. It's a really fine inversion in what the normal style would be.
But I think, the element that's very important for the entrepreneurs in the room, all of this, all this conversation always starts and always ends with what is the end business issue that you enable to solve? The business owner, the guy at the top that makes money selling something, doesn't care about Amazon or CloudStack or OpenStack or anything. He just cares about solving his or her issues. And so it's all about trying to take all this technology and twist it and form it like clay to the point that it becomes an enabler of solving that business problem. And then there's tremendous
But let
value,
me
and
just-
the communitization is not going to be a problem.
For the sake of the discussion, argue with that briefly. I would say the primary driver on IT now is agility, that what places like Amazon and Azure have convinced is you can do IT much more agilely than has been historically done in the enterprise. And what I see is that becoming an executive position. I talk to IT and say, I need more agility. I'm not interested, I agree, but I think what they're saying is I need agility. You say we should do it in our private resources and not go to the cloud. That's what I pay you for. It sounds like a rational argument, but you need to be agile. Isn't that, I mean, in this argument as to what drives it, isn't it business agility that really is pushing
It is a big one. The other one, which nobody talks about, but if you look at the stats, is very obvious. The assumption that things are up and are up 100% of the time, no matter what happened, it's not my problem. And if you look back 10 years ago, you can open any newspaper and you will find so-and-so was out of service for 12 hours. So-and-so couldn't, United couldn't board people on a plane for 7 hours because their systems went down. That all disappeared. Everybody expects everything up 100% of the time. And you guys figure out, the redundancy, the high availability, the whatever you do, but it's up. And people don't realize that we've got accustomed to it. They think only of the agility. Availability is as high.
Well, availability is assumed, which is what you're saying. But within that availability, which is something you have to prove, agility is a driver.
Absolutely.
So when you cannot provide availability, nobody's going to buy. But once you do, agility will
There's a lot of
lead.
differentiation in reliability, right? I mean, if you buy an EMC storage array, a tremendous amount of technology exists to create the abstraction of an incredibly high performance yet incredibly reliable system, because a generation of software demands that abstraction of the hardware. And so I think what VMware's done, which is brilliant, is it has created a fantastically near perfect abstraction of reliable compute, reliable storage, and reliable networking. So you can take all software in the last 25 years and move it off the hardware onto a stack. It's like holodeck for software, right? And the challenge is nothing that runs in cloud needs that abstraction anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. And but the point is that what you just described is actually, and I apologize if I'm offending
Go ahead,
anybody, is a rear view, mirror view, right? Because the availability of where we're going today with the native cloud applications, they don't care about availability of the underlying infrastructure. What they care about is whether or not 70% of it is alive somewhere, because I'm stateless, I am large, and so I don't have to worry about investing those tremendous resources into making my hypervisor
You compute
cluster.
guys have
That
it
is
so
true,
easy.
actually.
Oh
I
my
agree
gosh.
with this, but there's also another point to consider.
But-
the
but-
fact that you have to make old and new coexist together for
Yes.
very long times.
Correct.
This is either fortunate or unfortunate, but this is just the truth. So SAP and Oracle will still be around for sure for at least 10 years, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe not, but 10 for sure, guaranteed, right? And this is the main problem. And together with that, security. Because once you have mission critical applications, it is not just about I give you the agility or I give you the availability. Can I make it secure? And it is true that we don't hear about availability issues as often, but look at the security issue we had just last year.
Yes.
Between credit card theft and penetrations of large systems, Sony or Target or the others. There have been so many, right? So security is actually going to be one of the key elements here, because the more your systems are interconnected or even exposed in the cloud, the more you have essentially a surface that can be attacked by others. The more you are uniformed, the more you can be attacked easily.
So let me bring it back to OpenStack. And we've had all this discussion. Can you, for this audience, sort of define the business driver? if you had everything sorted all out and somebody just said, how should I think about OpenStack? What's the motivation? Why is this an important business problem? What is it as a make money vehicle?
I think you were touching on it earlier, where people have problems to solve and they just need a solution. The more specific that we got, what we did is we went out and looked for industries where, so in our case, data, where data was exploding, budgets were not, and come in at a point solution. Didn't matter that it was OpenStack. They needed a storage solution that solved the problem, and we just went after those markets and could attack very heavily against folks like EMC and others to have allow them to carry on their business and create more value, right? And that's
so you're saying it's sort of an enabler that by itself doesn't contribute value, but allows you to build a storage solution that you couldn't have built without it.
Well, we're providing infrastructure, and it's OpenStack is an enabler so that you can get to the using commodity off-the-shelf equipment. And like again, I was saying earlier, the compute guys have it easy. Oh, it's stateless app. Well, we have to actually, we're persisting data.
You have to work,
and,
yeah. You have to work.
Yeah, well, we have to, the service that we provide, instead of putting energy and effort into making sure that the hardware is itself reliable, we have to shift that stuff up into the software stack and lots of, and routing around failures and dealing with failures and all the corner cases that are involved with persistence, across multiple data centers, and that's a hard problem to solve.
So it's a new platform that does things in this cloud style where you solve problems in the software as opposed to the hardware.
Yep.
Enables the use of commodity hardware and is a platform for
Or
valuable solutions.
Standard hardware components.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, I'll simplify even more. I think it's all about the economics of production. This is an information economy. The biggest users of OpenStack, look at Walmart, right? They have 100,000 cores. They needed to.
I thought you didn't like Walmart.
What's that?
Could you decide, are you pro or anti-Walmart?
For some reason, they didn't want to use Amazon Web
I think it's a
Services.
brilliant
I don't know why.
company. I think it's a brilliant company. They're very efficient. But look at the NSA. They have a classified number of systems, but Snowden has leaked a lot about what they're doing with OpenStack. And I think that if you look at, it's all about the economics of production. OpenStack provides a very different. It's the printing press. I mean,
So it's like the Model T production line?
there's so many analogies. I mean, look at the Gutenberg printing press is like Amazon, and OpenStack's like the laser printer that lets you. I mean, it's like Amazon's like the power company, and OpenStack's like what Tesla's going to produce. It's solar panels and batteries in people's houses. It just changes the economics of the entire marketplace if you can decentralize large-scale computing at the edge of the enterprise network.
So can you give me just one analogy? I sort of understand the Model T, which is I can make cars really cheaply if they're all the same. What's the best non-computing analogy for this kind of articulated economy where the differentiation at the edge really made a
I
difference?
can help you. It's red, it's Italian, it does vroom, vroom. Starts with F.
Fiat.
Oh. You got me.
Well done. Well done.
Fiat is quiet.
Fix it again, Tony, is what that stands for. Right? Alex, what's your answer?
Well,
What's the
I was
economic
going
driver?
to say that what we see it is essentially, but it's unfortunately it's a computer analogy. It's a control plane for the data center, right? It's something that you just have, and whatever happens underneath is wonderful. You just plug to it and you use the resources. So it's a complete abstraction that lets you consume the resources without knowing what they are. And with a nice self-service menu. I want this, I want that, I have knobs that can just deliver it. So that's the convenience of it. And the early adopters of OpenStack were the companies for whom infrastructure was a product. And so people like PayPal, people like Symantec, people like WebEx, they understood it and they completely redeveloped their data centers with OpenStack as a control plane, and they're getting tremendous advantages. So now it was an easy one, right? Because they knew that they needed to do it. Service was a way they actually got it done. So now the enterprises, the true enterprises, are looking at this and saying, would like to learn to do this. So we're kind of going through this chasm, right, where the early adopters are done and they prove that it works, and now the big enterprises are learning. But as we cross that, it will go, and everybody will build it that way.
So, Simone, what's
Yeah,
the business driver?
I think there are few solutions available for different problems, right? OpenStack, for example, solves a particular set of problems, but not all of them. Sometimes you need physical hardware, not even virtualization for some old stuff. Sure. Or you need to live in private clouds. You cannot go to public because regulation. You need to have your data centers in whatever, Switzerland, for example, and there are no public data centers there. So there are many, well, I wouldn't say many, several different types of problems that need to be tackled with different IT solutions. In particular, VMware is trying to make different people happy by providing an OpenStack distribution for the OpenStack folks, a public cloud if you want to have elasticity, or vSphere NSX for private environment, etc. Different companies are trying to just focus on one particular thing and do that well. So I think all of those are valid strategies. The point, though, is that things, of course, are changing. But the big IT spending, the enterprise IT spending, is still somehow, I wouldn't say stuck, but slowly moving to the new era of cloud. And that hasn't changed much yet. Even public cloud went from 0% to 6 or 7% of the total. There's still a lot to go before you might say, well, public is really a big thing now. It is big in billions and billions of dollars, but compared to total IT spending, still quite small. And these things is changing, but not as fast as people would expect.
I love the Everett Dirksen U.S. Senate quote, which he actually apparently didn't say when he said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. After a while, it starts to add up to real money. Yeah. So the public cloud.
And if I just may add to what Simon has said, Mirantis has been known early on for some controversial PR, right? So one of the things that happened, and that was actually a truthful thing, is Boris, who is my co-founder, was the only guy on the board of OpenStack who voted against VMware joining, because he said OpenStack is about replacing VMware. We can't have somebody whose idea is to replace VMware to be on the board to promote OpenStack. And which is very interesting because today, if you look at, so Boris has publicly changed his mind. And today, if you look at, the reason Mirantis is getting adoption inside the large enterprise is because they have the tightest relationship with VMware. And VMware is actually endorsing us in deals, because when you go to a large enterprise and you show them the picture of the future, they go, that's great, but here's my present today, yep. And it's all VMware. And unless we find a way to work together in a very tight embrace, nobody is going to move the needle. So actually, we're good
just
friends,
to finish the one, Jacques.
Yeah, by the way, rumors are that a couple of Italians visited Boris and made him change his mind. But that's just rumors.
So, I have to tell a joke, speaking about, I'm a Russian Jew, you're an Italian, so we have something in common. And the question is, what happens if a Russian, not a Russian, a Jew or an Italian would lose a hand? How do you call that? The answer is speech impediment. We're proving it here.
Final business driver question.
No, I think, this is a classical example. I'm not sure how the exact quote goes, which is, we tend to overestimate how quickly the change will happen and underestimate how big the change will be.
Overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term.
So I think this is completely the case. I think, the case of VMware for me was the biggest endorsement of OpenStack, because essentially, if you buy my theory of the 1x, 3, 4x, and the 10x, you can't build a 3, 4x cloud using VMware. It's too expensive. And so for that use case, you're going to need to have OpenStack. Now, clearly, there'll be other things to do on top of OpenStack, and VMware very cleverly said, for those people, we'll use VMware internally, and we'll do the management, the higher layers where there's money, in the place where we get commoditized and can't make money on the low level.
So it's a way of, getting back to the differentiation, it's a way of creating computing platforms of differentiated quality.
And so for me, OpenStack is clearly going to enable people to have the Amazon-like infrastructure costs, but with a lot more services and with a lot more competition, which is ultimately very healthy and is going to enable a much larger.
So it would be like Walmart putting high-touch store into University Avenue in Palo Alto to service this
I don't
community.
think the Walmart analogy works.
So we're reaching the end of the time. This is an audience of aspiring entrepreneurs. I'd like to have a final comment from each of you, which is if you had to give knowledgeable advice to these people, if you had one thing to say at the end of having listened to this, what you do with respect to OpenStack, what do you say?
Go buy my book, OpenStack Swift. That's what I would say.
The DVDs and the videotapes are also available.
Buy the product, be better, but you gotta be trained. You gotta learn about the technology before you can consume the technology. And so, learning about it, whether you buy a book or not, is what I would say.
So you're saying if you don't know what OpenStack actually is, it's a bad
Go look it
beginning. Get literate with it. And,
Yep.
That's great advice. Chris?
This is a great conversation. If you paid attention and you feel like you have a handle on a lot of this, especially what Jacques said about the current state of this market, this is a 10-year transition, and we really are just at the beginning. When I raised money for Nebula almost 4.5 years ago, the concern was you're too late, Chris. You hung around at NASA too long. And arguably, we're still just getting started. And I do think over the next 10 years, because you've got such a momentum of trillions of dollars of infrastructure and applications and people and processes, there's a customer today, and they're still where they were 2 years ago, and it's one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So there's a tremendous opportunity if you get that and you can build products and companies that can take advantage of a 10-year shift towards kind of what we believe would happen a couple years ago will probably happen a couple years from now. This is a really big deal.
So don't worry about being too late. Great time to jump in.
Great time to
Lots
jump
of opportunity. Don't be daunted by all the stuff that's gone on.
Ship is not sailed.
Okay, Alex?
So if I were to give advice, I'll say two things. One is if you deal in the OpenStack part of the infrastructure ecosystem, be it application infrastructure or physical infrastructure, the first thing is understand what is it that you are enabling on top of OpenStack that you're not competing with OpenStack. And if you're competing with OpenStack, because OpenStack will eventually move there, think of a model of how you can become part of OpenStack, because creating a competing product without having the marketing momentum of OpenStack is a disaster. And that's an intricate process, and you have to think it through very carefully. And that's my number one advice. My number two advice, don't listen to VCs. And this is I'm not smiling here, I'm very serious, because the problem with the VC model in this economy is VCs are investing in technology assets, and it's a bet where one of N is going to be successful. So it's totally okay for a VC to commit to a product early, and if 1 out of 10 succeeds, it actually works for the model. So don't, in the open source ecosystem, do not commit to the model, to the product, until you found a way to prove it with real customers. And when you have use cases and customer traction, then you can commit. And VCs traditionally, and some are changing now, want to see a product story, not necessarily attraction, but a story to then commit you to that. And the example of the OpenStack ecosystem early players, those who committed to the product too early are not doing as well as those who kind of waited.
So just one
So this is specific for the open source ecosystem. It's not true for all
yeah,
the
one of the things, and I'll just try and state it differently, but exactly the same thing. If you want to play in an open source community, you need to understand what it means to do that. You have to embrace the idea. It's not a marketing term. It's not an attribute. You're either all in or you're probably not going to be happy. So another piece of learning is if you want to really get involved in OpenStack, you have to spend enough time to understand why you want to be part of that community.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it's actually quite hard. I was an entrepreneur in Italy, but nowhere near what these folks have been in their lives. It's actually quite hard to pretend to give advice to people that want to be entrepreneur. So my piece of advice would be listen to entrepreneurs, real entrepreneurs. So not me in particular, but if I'm forced to give advice on OpenStack, I would say, I think the main thing is that most of what we see around open source is usually extremely dangerous if you get into that for the first time, if you don't know the ecosystem well, or if you don't know the business model well. many of the companies, I also meet a lot of startups. Many of the companies I meet that try to go around an open source model, they usually fail, not because they're not smart. Some of them are the smartest engineers in the world, but because they fail to understand what the real business model is around that. And I agree with you. Red Hat, good example. I'm pretty much sick of hearing Red Hat like 100 times every time you ask you what's the a good example of a company that will be successful like you. If there are not so many others, there might be a reason, because it's extremely hard. So just realize this: if you want to build a business around OpenStack or around an open source technology, it doesn't mean you don't have to use OpenStack for another type of business, of course. That's a different story.
Sure.
I think Alex is right, actually, about VCs and this specific aspect. The venture model is a very narrowly defined way of building a company. There is hundreds of ways to build a successful company, of which the VC model is only one. And you have to understand that the business we're in, actually you defined it correctly, Alex, is we want to find a technology or a business asset that we can pile in a huge amount of money, provided a tremendous acceleration, and benefit from the resulting outcome. Many businesses don't match that, and it's totally okay. There's way too much of the VC-backed model that people fall in love with in businesses that are totally not relevant to that. And so, especially in an open source ecosystem, there's many ways that you can start with the service, you can start with consulting, you can start with additional products, integration. So don't just think about the VC model. To the extent that you want to build something that matches the VC, the formula that we will want to see goes back to what we know how to do. Look at where this is all going. Become an absolute expert into how the current ecosystem works, how it's going to evolve. The good news compared to 2 years ago is we kind of have a high certainty, not necessarily of the timing, but of the outcome. 2 years ago, it was the Wild West. Now we can, if somebody shows up in my office and says, I'm building this model, I'm assuming OpenStack is going to happen, I'm going to fine. Right? It wasn't the case 2 years ago. So think about that and build beyond that.
2 years ago, it was F and something else.
So we're out of time. We're out of time. We're going to end the formal part of this. The panelists will be here for a while. So if you have a business plan to foist on them, you have an opportunity. I absolutely want to thank both the VLab people for orchestrating this and this remarkable. I hope you appreciate that you got a remarkable set of OpenStack participants to this discussion. And I want to thank them for their thoughtful interactions and patience with my analysts. If you shouldn't ever get entrepreneurial advice from somebody in a big company, by God, don't ever get it from an analyst either for the same reason. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.